The story commences with a sudden burst of bright light illuminating the screen. A cursor, reminiscent of a computer interface, hovers over what appears to be a battlefield, signaling that the unfolding events are situated within a game. Still, the conflict continued, and it is a fierce battle between two factions, one venerating a god named Nebula and the other devoted to a god named Hegemonia. Each side engages in intense warfare, showcasing unique specialties and strategies, and as opposed gods wield control over their respective believers, akin to players maneuvering pieces in a game of chess. However, the player's freedom surpasses that of chess, allowing them to unleash formidable actions, such as launching nuclear attacks on the battlefield, which the player Nebula had approved, launching several nuclear warheads to his opponent's side. But even with this, player Hegemonia wasn't fazed, as he had anticipated this already, launching tower-like structure embedded with faith as a form of an interceptor missile, which revealed to be super effective, as the missiles instantly were blown up. But that was within his calculations. The enemy's missile interception system couldn't keep up with him, as a single one was left unscathed, and it was heading right to the center of the enemy's imperial palace, where countless of orcs were just praying diligently for their god to save them. And if this was reality, prayers would be meaningless. But this wasn't reality. This was Lost World, and faith and prayers in this world always produced meaningful results. Just like how a spirit just suddenly materialized because of the faith of the people, stopping the nuclear attack from landing on their territory. However, Nebula wasn't surprised, as he expected this cheap opponent to be using the current meta, the Holy Oak strategy, which Hegemonia, the second placer in the server ranking, was openly proud of, and therefore even mocked Nebula because of his failed attempt. But Nebula couldn't blame Hegemonia for coming out with such confidence, because this was an overpowered strategy all along, as it is easy to increase the population due to the nature of the orc race. And as the number of believers increased, faith resources were also quickly acquired. Science, technology, and culture were then gained through invasion. This was a good strategy that constantly received good reviews because the great amount of faith accumulated and the large number of orcs resulted in an advantage in war. And the fact that the opponent chose the sky as their realm meant that they were aware of and took into account Nebula's choice of skill, the science development skill. This prevented him from using majority of his aerial arsenal. They even prepared behind the scene to counter his nuclear attack, saying that they can summon a spirit chain apostle with a high caliber at such a fast rate. However, Nebula remained unimpressed, as this was all too obvious for him. So even if his opponent has large territory that even reached the skies, it is still just a sky above their heads. So he just need to have a weapon beyond it, and because of this realization, he had prepared an eye-operated military satellite made from ancient relics, equipped with the rods from God. Even Hegemonia was shocked to see that Nebula has this weapon, as he didn't expect after a nuclear weapon. He still has a high-mass weapon more destructive than the last. With this, Hegemonia could only scream at Nebula to stop, but Nebula doesn't give a shit to what his opponents wanted, and therefore he just let his attack continue. It is just a few tungsten rod after all. Still, Hegemonia attempted to block it with his spirit chain apostle, but Nebula was confident that it would fail. With the rod adding up the accumulated gravitational acceleration, it has the speed approximately 10 times the speed of sound. And with this, the rod just went through the apostle like it was butter, and when it made contact on the ground, it made such a devastating sight, as it penetrated the ground with such force on par with a nuclear weapon, just without the nuclear after effects. However, Hegemonia couldn't accept such outcome, as he was a sore loser after all, and so he demanded another round. And this bitch even has the audacity to proclaim that this will be the beginning of his winning streak. But just like before, Nebula remained unimpressed, and so he stoically just declined Hegemonia's request. Still, he can't help but wonder if Hegemonia has still few tricks up his sleeves, as he still strongly believed to win against him. However, being the #1 ranker for a while, he knew all too well that there was nothing that Hegemonia could do that would surprise him, as the game itself has nothing new to offer. and the fact that he was able to complete all the achievements available and maintain first place in the rankings was enough of a proof that the game is nothing more to offer to him. And so, slowly but surely, he decided to quit playing. To his surprise, before he could leave, a message suddenly popped up on his screen, which initially irritated him at first, because who on earth is bothering him at this time of day? Still, curiosity got the best of him, and so he opened the message, only to be met with praise, congratulating him for having the only one who has cleared all achievements, and the game really appreciated that he enjoyed Lost World so far. But seeing such message only confused him. He could only see these things when the game would announce an end of service. But due to the game's popularity, it seems like it wouldn't be the case. So he clicked more to see what's more of this sudden message. To his surprise, it revealed to him that the game he had been playing was just in early beta access and would be scheduled to be officially released. So as the top player Nebula, they give him a rare opportunity to enjoy the game before official service. And because he is on the pursuit of seeing more of this game would offer, he accepted their request, and with this, he was instantly sucked in a sea of codes, where binary codes float endlessly. But not even a moment passed. Darkness ensues soon after that. The empty space began to reveal the countless of stars that occupied it. Under those said stars was a familiar figure. It was Nebula's game avatar, opening his eyes. Light shines mirroring the magnificent sight before him, a view far from what he was used to, beautiful, but it felt like it was a ruin of some sort, where stone columns in a rugged style reminiscent of Greek temples circled the place. But the strange thing was that the sky was black, even though the horizon was visible. This could only mean that there is no atmosphere. Obviously, one wouldn't be able to breathe without an atmosphere. And looking at himself, he recognizes that he was in the body of the character he was playing. And so he got up thinking that all of this was just a vivid dream. Unexpectedly, a mysterious figure approached from behind and informed him that it is not, and he is here because he has been chosen. But before he could formulate a response, the enigmatic woman, draped in a flowing robe, warmly welcomed him, addressing him by his real name, Sun Woon. After that, she introduced herself as Alden. This instantly raised questions of how this figure got to know his real name. Who is this woman? More than that, what does she meant by being chosen? But before he defined answers, shadows suddenly begun to appear before his eyes, which surprised him at first. But he knew the silhouettes of the shadows were those of ordinary people. He knew this because the shadows were also surprised and looking around just like he was. And noticing that Nebula was already aware of what the shadows truly were, Alden explained why they were covered in mystery. And that is because they all come from the same world. And since there is a chance of them knowing one another, they have covered everyone in shadows for a fair game. But this doesn't explain why they were here exactly. And so she decided to get straight to the point. She raised her hand and revealed to them the Earth. But looking at it closer, the continents of this planet was different from what Earth had. It was a view of the place they have seen many times. So it was undoubtedly the planet of the Lost World. And in this vast lost world, the players had become a true god. This surprised everyone. Even if Nebula couldn't hear any sound from other players, he felt it very well. There are people who felt embarrassed of how cringe-worthy the statement was. The dialogue felt like it came from an edgelord. Still, since they got nothing better to do, they continued to listen what Alden had to say. So Alden told them that the lost world they knew of isn't a world that simply exists in the game. It's a land abandoned by the gods due to an incident in the past. On that planet, a once brilliant civilization blossomed. Different races lived in harmony. However, for unknown reasons, the gods left it. And so now it's time for new gods, and the game that they played was created with the purpose of finding suitable new candidates for that planet. Just by trying, they can become God. It's essentially like the lost world they had played, where at first, only low-class creatures will believe in them. But if they succeed in increasing their number of followers, they may become the one and only god of the planet, and the world becomes theirs, and they'll be able to do everything they want. And all the desires they have ever dreamed of it is feasible as a god in this world. This was a chance of a lifetime, but things are just too good to be true. He felt that there was something Alden still wasn't addressing. And so Nebula asked the precaution of giving up now. To his surprise, if they give up, they will just go back to their daily life and would lose their memories of this place, which was pretty convenient. And so Nebula asks if this was still the same if he gives up mid-challenge. But just as expected, they were not so generous to let them do that. This begged Nebula to follow up a question, asking what happens if he is defeated by other gods, and Alden just simply answered that if that happens, he will meet a godly end, and they will welcome it. This is what Nebula had expected, if it was a game where the victor could gain everything. It stood to reason that the participants would have to risk their lives. And should this real-world competition follow the game The Lost World, one might have to risk more than their life. But this just only made him smile. The exhilarating feeling of putting their lives at risks made this game more interesting for him. And so there was no reason for him to give up now. Now that was clarified to all the players. Alden asked the people who plans to give up to step up now and notify her, while for those who want to take on the challenge, she presented cards for them to choose, where it can present them a small area where they will begin their journey. Seeing this, Nebula recognized that it's really just like in the game. The means to start the game was selecting a small area. However, his trains of thought was disrupted as he noticed that other people are giving up already. It started with a few people, but soon others followed as well. With this, Nebula started to analyze how many people was left. Obviously, the starting number of the people that had transported in this place was also the same amount of player of the Lost World could allow in a single planet for a single match, and it was 32. That means the final number of people left was 27, which was still a lot of competition to be the only god of this world. However, his trains of thought were disturbed yet again by the mysterious woman asking him to choose a card first. This could only mean that the order of which they can choose was the same order of their rank, and so he did the honors to be the first one to choose. But as he lifted the card, his eyes grew larger as he was in shock to see that he got this small area of all things. Still, before he could even say anything, he was instantly transported into the Lost World and into his designated small area, where a beautiful greenery and a stream of river could be seen. And within those rivers, different creatures inhabits the place. However, the inhabitants were more different from what's on Earth, as the supposedly frog actually has a well-toned body that could be easily called daddy of how lean he looks. Still, it got a heart of a golden retriever, as it was just happy to catch some fish. In the midst of this, a blue butterfly emanating with mysteriousness just casually passed by them. This butterfly turned out to be Nebula's familiar. This is what he got from those cards. The small area of insects. It wasn't insects in a strict sense, but rather a category that covered, to some extent, several arthropods and crustaceans. But among the 32 small areas that could have been selected first, insects wasn't very well evaluated and actually had the lowest winning rate according to actual data. But he didn't let this affect him, since everything depends on how one use it. It is even backward compatible with birds, so it is quite useful in the beginning. However, another problem arises. The starting point where he was at is the eastern end of the continent. This place had a disadvantage in advancing. This means that the battles don't happen pretty often in the beginning, so gaining benefits through early engagement is near impossible to accomplish, and therefore an aggressive strategy like he was used to won't be viable. In that sense, a race that eats insect would be a good starting race, like those frogmen, for example. But what bothers him is the number of tribes. Lost World enables a god to exert influence on creatures equal to the level of faith it possesses. However, the bigger the group, the less little miracles were cared about. So even though it may be a benefit to gain a big tribe in the beginning, there was a risk of vainly consuming all 10 faith points without seeing any result. And this amount of faith points is way too small to have any influence on the group of frogmen. With this, he looked for another group nearby, leading him to wander to a more desolated place, where a small group of lizardmen was wandering around aimlessly. This species was also a great candidate, since lizardmen also eat insects, and they can survive in such extreme condition unlike the frogmen. So he was more compelled to look at them closer. This made him notice of how their number had dwindled a little, which was actually great as it was just the right amount that Nebula wanted. To his surprise, the group even contained the sick and elderly. With this, he realized that this lizardman came from the original group, and the reason why they were out in the desert was because they must have been pushed out in a power struggle. And at the back of this small group, there was a young, wounded lizard man. This was such a perfect setup for Nebula, because the more he feels abandoned by the world, the more difficult and tired he would feel. And with this, he will put all his hopes up for a small miracle to happen. But he is such a fragile being. Still, with an opportunity like this, he decided to go through in supporting this wounded lizard. A few moments later, the group of lizardmen continued to roam this barren land. Exhaustion was noticeable within their expressions. Fortunately for them, they have somehow encountered a wounded gazelle on their path, which they didn't hesitate to charge towards, and because it had been a long time since they saw meat, they act like savages and consumed the gazelle in frenzy. While the wounded and the elderly just sit on the side as this happened, and just a moment more, the once lively gazelle vanished in an instant. All that was remained from it were its bones. But still, the healthy lizard man was planning on consuming this until the very end, as the bone marrow on these bones is also very delicious. However, before they could do that, another one of their kind, Jal, snatched the bones and told them that they already have enough, and they should leave these remains to those who can't hunt. Even though it was just mere bones, the injured and elderly was thankful of it, and they don't even blame the others, as they fully understand their circumstances. But unlike the weak lizards, the healthy ones questioned Jal if this was really the right decision. They aren't bothered if they give the leftovers to the old or young. But that guy, it was evident that he's going to die soon. The wound is already rotting. It's even a miracle that he was still alive, because with the state he was in now, he should have died already. They don't even know how he keeps up without falling behind. But even with this facts, Jal's belief remained the same. This wasn't just out of sympathy, but because the wounded lizardman named Rakrak was the only one who had faced a saber-toothed tiger when everyone else turned their backs and ran away. Thanks to Rakrak, there was no other damage to the group other than his wounds. If it wasn't for Rakrak, many would have died or gotten injured, and in the worst-case scenario, the whole group could have fallen apart. And of course, the others understood this and appreciated what Rakrak has done. But the fact still remains that he is going to die soon, and there's not enough food to share with, to which Jal exclaimed to them that they are being shameless, ungrateful son of a lizard. But they don't seem to mind her remarks as they care more about logical reasoning. Still, even with such arguments, they decided to go with Jal's reasoning, as it can be seen that Rakrak was still in the group. However, with the group lying near with each other, Rakrak just lay on the corner all alone. And because of his injuries, it made it hard for him to sleep comfortably. However, this also allowed him to immediately notice the blue butterfly just flying around above him, and looking at it with curiosity, it led him to see the top of a hill, illuminated with a shining light, and with nothing else to do. Rakrak had stood up and followed the strange light, and seeing him walk in the middle of the night made others assume that he is finally leaving the group. Still, it was his own decision to do this, so no one stopped him, and they were just fixated on what he was about to do next. While Rakrak, on the other hand, was grasping on the last purpose he had left in this cruel life of his, and that is to follow what seemed to be a glimpse of hope. But as he ascended, he was wondering if this was just a deranged fantasy of his, and the fact that he was the only one who reacted to seeing it. It might really be the case, and even if what he is seeing right now means something, he wonders what on earth would that be and where it would lead him to. But he doesn't have to wonder for long. As soon as he arrived at the top of the hill, his eyes widened with surprise as a hill of beetles just erected like a tower. It was enough for the entire group to satiate their hunger. With this, a system message appeared in front of Nebula notifying him that the lizardman recognized this event to be a miracle, which he was relieved to see, and seeing that other lizardmen enjoyed his gift. The next step is to make them realize this miracle was done by him and let them know his name, his divinity. To his surprise, it seems like he doesn't have to. since Rakrak decided to announce the miracle himself, which was understandable, as individuals with high willpower tend to take care of things on their own. Unexpectedly, with the beetle on Rakrak's hand, they decided to recognize his divinity as the nameless beetle god, which surprised him, as he had expected them to name it Butterfly at the least. Since he had used butterflies to guide them for all this time, a beetle god is still fine. And he understood that no one has a great name from the beginning, so he lets it be. And as he looks over them, Nebula couldn't contain his smile, because he acknowledges that Rakrak will be important to him. Of course, that goes for Rakrak as well. The next day arrived. Rakrak had seen butterflies again. Still, he contemplated following it again, while his lizard kind, on the other hand, was excited to know he has seen butterflies, as this was a sign that they were going to have a full stomach. However, this time he was hesitant to chase his fantasy right away. Until now, they were in great debt to the swarms of beetles. However, the beetles could be leading them to a trap if one looked at the matter from another perspective, especially when winter is coming soon, and beetles would appear from the cold directions on the north. So if they head in the direction where the beetles came, they will surely freeze to death. And hearing his reasonings, this made the others immediately change their mind on feasting on beetles and just go to a different direction. But even though this was the logical solution, Rakrak felt that they shouldn't do that, because there is nothing in the opposite direction as well. However, he also admits that he doesn't have a clue on what purpose is there in the fantasy he was seeing, but for now, he just doesn't have any other choice but to follow. Meanwhile, Nebula saw everything and noticed that they are losing faith. Still, he understood that it's just the beginning, so it was reasonable for them to lack faith, and there is nothing he could do. But if he were to be specific, he would rather hear a logical leader than a leader who is blinded by faith. However, if Rakrak would continue believing in him, he is sure to make Rakrak experience a future that he could never imagine. And just as Nebula wanted, Rakrak's tribe walked through the path he had paved, and they then began to climb a small hill that rose past the wilderness. And as they climbed the hill, their eyes began to widen as they couldn't believe what was in front of them. And seeing that everyone was too stunned to say anything, Rakrak turned towards the group and proclaimed that the nameless beetle god has yet again gave them another miracle, as he brought them to a sanctuary where thick bushes and trees circled the wide spring, from which small waterfalls and streams flowed. With this, everyone cheered with joy from the top of their lungs, celebrating the glimpse of hope of survival that was given to them by believing in Rakrak's decision. At the same time, Nebula's divinity level increased to level 2, and his level of small area has also increased to 2. With this, Blessings of Bug's ability is now available. And this was such an important skill to have, because in the game The Lost World, it was possible to grant a special ability to the believers who supported the small area once the player's small area leveled up. This was called God's Blessing, and it allows the believers to evolve, as the blessings would change the appearance of the species, and the change would be passed down to the descendants. And if his hunch were right, Rakrak would know for sure what he wanted, and so Nebula decided to bless Rakrak and him his priest in order to deliver his will to his people. A few moments later, the day turned into night. The lizardmen sleep peacefully under the clear night sky, and because Rakrak was now a priest, Nebula is now able to get inside his dreams and show himself to him, but with a more familiar persona akin to Rakrak's species. And for this, Rakrak had so much things to ask. But before he could say anything, Nebula just stretched out his arm, like he was asking Rakrak to hold it. But as Nebula expected, Rakrak was insightful. He knew exactly that it wasn't what he wanted. So Rakrak remained still, prompting Nebula to shift his outstretched arm to point at something below. To Rakrak's surprise, he was now holding a buffalo's skull, and somehow he then lifted it up like he had been doing this for countless of times, and placed it on the nameless beetle god's head. With this, the image of their god became clear to him, and so as soon as the day arrived, he gathered everyone, and with every detail, he told them what exactly he had dreamed of. And in hearing this, the more insightful lizardman had deduced that the message of the beetle god he had seen in his dreams was clear, and that he is asking for them to sacrifice a buffalo. However, to hunt a buffalo, They have to go deep into the wilderness, which is just too big of a risk for Jal, however. The others had different opinion of what she just said, as they believe they have a duty to fulfill, since the one who brought them to the sanctuary had personally asked for it. But even with this reasoning, Jal's decision remained the same, as she just doesn't want to put their pack in danger, which they understand where she is coming from. And so they suggested that perhaps all pack of hunters should step forward and join the hunt, to which Jal immediately disagreed, as it was a stupid suggestion. Because if they do just that, who will be left to protect the others who are weakened? This argument left the others unable to think of any alternative ways, and so it seems like they were in a predicament. But to their surprise, Rakrak also agreed to Joel's concern. He was a great leader. He isn't willing to put the whole pack in danger as well. So he suggested that he will go alone. This instantly surprised everyone. Even Joel couldn't stand what Rakrak had just suggested, because they know for a fact that it is near impossible to catch a buffalo alone. Seeing them worried like this, Rakrak clarified that he decided this not because he was being reckless, but because God had given him a blessing. This initially confused Joel, and so Rakrak enlightened them about what he just said, explaining to them about how he encountered another unbelievable miracle when he woke up. His wound has completely healed, and his shoulders were all covered with black scales, just like a beetle. And seeing this with their own eyes, Jal admits that what happened to him is a bit strange. However, this isn't enough of a reason to go hunting buffalo alone, which Rakrak agreed as well, because the real reason is the massive strength he now acquired. To demonstrate this, he hurled a spear to a tree and penetrated hard enough for it to shatter within contact. This display instantly left all the lizardmen in shock and in disbelief. The impact was so forceful that all that remained on the tree was its bark, leaving the lizardmen in awe. With this, they eagerly inquired if Rakrak had been concealing this extraordinary power. Even though it was a lifeless tree, the showcase strength exceeded their capabilities. So it became apparent that the Rakrak they thought they knew really had undergone a remarkable transformation. But as they marveled at Rakrak's newfound skill, on the horizon, their intended prey emerged and sprinted toward them. Rakrak, seizing the opportunity, announced it with enthusiasm, leaving the lizardmen in shock, as they couldn't believe such coincidence to happen. Because a herd of buffalo always moves to the same place, it makes no sense to get lost and come all the way here. But now, it seems like their previous argument was pointless after all, because their god really wanted that offering. And so, without moment's hesitation, Rakrak charged to the herd of buffalo, and skillfully hurled his spear into the midst of the group. Striking with precision, the first buffalo, once feared by the lizardmen, fell before their eyes. This boosted the lizardmen's morale, and so they eagerly joined Rakrak in a unified attack on the buffalo. A few moments later, the day turned into night once again, but now with the countless buffalo slayed, they had managed to create an altar with bones, and in the top of it was a whole buffalo ready to be offered to the nameless beetle god. And with Rakrak's glib tongue, he uttered the right words to consecrate the offering, and others followed suit. And although it is a sloppy and clumsy ritual for Nebula's eyes, the sincerity behind it was what mattered. So Nebula was able to gain faith beyond his expectations. It was a decent rite as a novice priest. And now that Nebula thinks of the time he put into it, it was worth doing this much. He couldn't control the buffalo, as he wasn't the god of wild grass that a buffalo eats. Back issue at this stage, it is difficult to expect knowledge and skills equivalent to herding, but still their ignorance was too much. So it seems like the lizard men are still savages, and the population support of this oasis is not very high at most. The limit will be a few years. So in their current state, with their primitive ass, who doesn't know anything about farming or ranching, it is bound that they will face difficulty to get through a calamity. However, even if he realized this, he understood that it is still very difficult to realize certain knowledge on your own. And it's not okay to say it directly either, because it violates the law of causality. But it's not that there is no way, it will just take some time. So if that's the case, then first thing he has to do is starting by giving a blessing. With this, another light shined towards Rakrak, A few days had passed. The altar they had previously built had grew larger as they have hunted more buffaloes. But what's even more surprising was the significant change Rakrak had gone through. Because of the blessing that Nebula gave, Rakrak and his men had evolved and had now black scales like the beetle they had consumed. But even with this, Rakrak was troubled, as he had a disturbing dream in previous night, and he doesn't know what it meant, as the vision was ambiguous, where the altar, once a symbol of prosperity, now shook precariously in the unsettling dream. The pond of blessings, which had protected them for many years, had lost its vitality. No more fish thrived in its once teeming waters, and the ground had become so parched that no root plants could be found, which seems to be a dire dream, however. Jal pointed out that it will be a long time before that happens, indicating that he shouldn't worry that much, especially because the god takes care of them, which Rakrak agreed, as believing God too, more than anyone else. But the gods will often come across as difficult for them to understand, so if the leader is lacking in understanding its meaning, there will come a time that they will betray God's will, and he is afraid of that happening. And so he ponders hard on what his vision had shown him and find out the meaning of it. To his surprise, he doesn't have to wonder for long as he saw a large group emerging from the horizon. With this, they now know why the altar shook. It was to warn them about the arrival of their enemy. And looking at them closely, there was no doubt that these guys are the ones who kicked them out. And this was obvious as the leader had blue scale like them from before. And above all, the large monster that only the leader could tame was with them, solidifying their recognition. And looking at the numbers, it looks like the entire tribe has arrived. That could mean that their hometown, a wetland with green leather, was completely devastated. This really grinded Rakrak's gear, and the only possible explanation Jal could come up with was that the large monster was high maintenance, that it depleted their resources at a much faster rate. Nonetheless, they were confident that they will not be able to locate their sanctuary, since it is located on terrain that cannot be seen until you climb up. So, there is a possibility that they may pass by without knowing. However, this didn't go as they had hoped for, as the ones who were in patrol, led by Yer, exposed their presence by boldly shouted at the approaching tribe to stop their advances, as this was the sanctuary of the nameless beetle Avatar. So they better not take a single step in their turf. However, this only fueled curiosity on the other side. Even Rakrak couldn't believe the stupidity of Yer's. Still, he told Jal not to worry, since this may also be God's arrangement, which confused Jal's. So she asked what he meant by that. In response, Rakrak explained that he believed that God deliberately caused this situation. This led Jal to assume he meant it was a test from God. But Rakrak clarified that it might not be a test, but rather a mission to accept and save those who were once part of their community. But even if that were the case, Jal remained concerned, since they know all too well that the leader of their previous tribe is just ruthless. He didn't even think twice to drive out the weak tribe into the wilderness. So changing a leader's mind is just impossible. However, as they ponder this, the blue butterfly appeared in front of Rakrak once more, a clear sign of God's will. With this, he realizes that it was foolish for them to dare to think beyond their scope, as they don't have the ability to see the future, and speculating here about what will happen wouldn't get them anywhere. So the only thing they can do right now is to do what they can, and that is to face their adversaries. Meanwhile, Nebula was delighted to see that Rakrak understood exactly what he meant. Rakrak's tribe and the Blue-Hide tribe must be united for population growth and technological advancement. But what's a bit strange is that Rakrak made that decision on his own. This led Nebula to believe that this was because of Rakrak's high willpower. And a leader with high self-will is a good thing for Nebula, and only thing he wished now is if only he could instill a firm belief. With this, he would be allowed to control everything individually, and he will be able to express his intentions more efficiently. However, Nebula acknowledged that such developments would take time and a higher level of influence. For now, he resolved to concentrate on the impending battle, and just as expected, The cunning leader of the Blue Lizardmen had decided to use his sly mouth to get more information out of the stupid Lizardmen. And with every mock, Yur's group revealed more and more information about their place. And when the leader was just about to think he got the best of them, someone he didn't expect arrived and answered his domineering question. But with a more confidence and conviction, Rakrak had also revealed that their place had an avatar. Rakrak's demeanor exuded of that of a leader, and so the blue leader had withdrawn his mocking voice and asked seriously what Rakrak meant by an avatar, prompting Rakrak to explain that this place is the domain of the nameless beetle avatar. However, the blue guy doesn't believe in such thing, and with this, he discerned that the leader in front of him is just delusional like the others, and so he regained back his domineering tone and looked down on Rakrak's tribe once more, and then with exuding audacity, he demanded that they leave, assuring them that if they departed immediately, he wouldn't launch an attack. The disdainful attitude even extended to the mount, looking at them as if they were trash, and if that wasn't menacing enough, he confidently asserted that they stood no chance against him, boasting of his countless followers, and according to him, if Rakrak were truly a leader, he should have already calculated by now the undeniable truth of his words. Much to the blue leader's surprise, Rakrak merely shook his head and aimed his spear towards the blue guy, indicating that he is willing to fight him. This in turn caught the blue guy off guard, but even before he could say anything, Rakrak turned his attention to those who followed the blue leader, attempting to reason with them. He extended an invitation for them to join Rakrak's tribe, promising that under God's protection, they would be cared for according to his will. However, definitely this only made the blue leader laugh hysterically, as he saw what Rakrak was spouting was all bullshit, so it seems like there was no point in them talking, as they were all foolish in the blue guy's eyes. But Rakrak said, "Nuh-uh, you don't know God. And look at this spear, it's sharp," which taken aback the blue leader. The spear was indeed sharp. But what concerned the blue guy more is that this Rakrak just kept talking nonsense. He definitely crazy. And so he decided to attack this foolish lizard. And as the blue guy attacked, Rakrak prayed to his god to give him courage and strength to defeat the enemy in front of him. However, to his dismay, his god responded, Psyche thought, as the spear that he was holding just shattered on impact. With this, he knew it was all over, and so he freezed up. However, before this happened, a system interface popped up in front of Nebula. Since two different tribes came into contact, experience points for both tribes increased significantly. Subsequently, this triggered another system interface to pop up, and since he had been paying a lot of attention to one tribe, these tribes are now part of his territory. With this, another skill was available for Nebula to use, which he didn't think twice to use because of his current circumstance. With this, before the large monster's attack could land, a beam of bright light suddenly fell directly on Rakrak. With this, he was able to dodge the upcoming attack, as he was now exuding a great amount of mana, since he is now one with Nebula as he had took over his consciousness. Meanwhile, the blue guy doesn't have a single clue on what happened. Still, he tries to attack Rakrak once more, but Nebula, who is in Rakrak's body, just looked at his attempt with an indifferent expression, and their movement was just so slow to him, and so Nebula got time to open the blue guy status window to see his strength. To Nebula's surprise, Rakrak alone could manage to defeat this fool, so it seemed like the only reason he was losing was because of the little Drake monster, as it had 87 strength beyond what Rakrak has, but with the blessing. It's not difficult anymore, and so Nebula dashed towards the Drake, which caught the Drake off guard of how fast he was. This was possible because the skill-strong avatar gives the user an additional stat called Divinity. One divinity equals 200 times the maximum value of power that can exist naturally. To put it simply, the power of Rakrak now is 630, and so Nebula easily slapped the Drake's face into the ground, flipping them like they were pancakes. This shocked everyone, as they couldn't even believe it was possible. This overwhelming difference in power was just out of this world. Even Rakrak's own tribesman, who was used to Rakrak's strength, was in shock, and so silence followed, as they were all too stunned to say anything. But now that the threat was gone, Rakrak's men was about to celebrate, however. It seems like Rakrak remained indifferent, so they halted their celebration. Meanwhile, the blue guy was in disbelief himself. He can't grasp the fact that he was defeated. His calculations were never wrong, and the only conclusion he could make was that Rakrak had pulled a trick from his ass. And so he attempted another attack on Rakrak, but little did he knew, Nebula was still in control of Rakrak's body, and Nebula doesn't give a shit. So he clapped the blue guy so hard that his head was now facing the other way around, killing him on the spot. After that display, with a cold tone, he asked the others if they would also like to try its hands. But who in the right mind would do that? And so they let go of their weapons and swear allegiance to Rakrak and his tribe. And seeing that they have completely submitted, Nebula leave Rakrak's body, and therefore Rakrak regained his consciousness. Still, he knew what had happened and can't believe that it did just happen. The avatar just come in his body, and he felt he was dreaming. A few moments later, the day turned into night once more, but the paradise they lived was livelier than before, as the countless of lizardmen had gained their numbers, and amidst of it, same conversation can be heard. The new lizard men couldn't believe that what in front of them is the same tribe who went out into the wilderness, as they now have a different color, prompting them to explain that it was because they are following the nameless beetle avatar. That's why they changed and became stronger. If this didn't happen, they would have died wandering in the wilderness. With this story, the new tribe folks now know the strength of the avatar. Even their leader's strength was out of this world. As this happened, Rakrak was just sitting with Jal contemplating about something. But his trains of thought was disrupted by Jal asking him if their current predicament was okay. Because with him accepting the others, their population has increased sixfold. With this, the place they are staying at will rapidly deteriorate, which he knows all too well. That is also the reason he was thinking so hard in silence. But the only option he could think now was that they had to leave this place, which surprised Jal, as they couldn't just wander around the wilderness without any answers. To which Rakrak responded that it wasn't the case because he feels it. The answers will definitely lie within them, the answer sent by God through their old brothers.
This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing and reincarnated into a god named Nebula. However, he's not alone in this divine realm, as there were 27 other gods, and they have to fight to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. But before they start, each of them was given a small area to control, and to Nebula's disappointment, his area is the insect world, notorious for its low success rate in the game. But because Nebula was a smart ass, he had used his brain to turn around his circumstance. And with this, he had found a suitable tribe that is compatible with his ability, and so he immediately influenced them by showing them miracles. And luckily for him, a lizardman named Rakrak was insightful enough to realize what his intentions were, and so Nebula was able to level up his abilities and evolve this lizardman's civilization quite easily, and therefore they were able to conquer another tribe, a crucial step for Nebula to progress the lizardman's civilization even faster. But this also led to a new problem the lizardmen have to face. With their number increased in one night, their resources were bound to deplete at a much faster rate. But since Rakrak was insightful, he instantly knew that their god wanted them to leave the sanctuary and find a larger and more resource-rich area. Now on to the next part. The next day had arrived. Rakrak's tribesmen is trying to tame the little drake monster. However, it seems like they were having a hard time at it. They even tried to convince it by telling that its master is dead, so it should just submit. But unexpectedly, with this foolishness of theirs, the drake whipped its tail to retaliate, almost hitting one of the lizard dude. And initially they stood their ground, but it quickly became clear that the drake was not taking them seriously, as it tried to be cheeky and launched itself to them. Luckily for them, the beast was tied to a tree. Still, they knew that if they prolonged this further, the beast will just get away. And for that, they loudly asked it if it really wanted to get scolded, because they will do just that if it keeps this up. However, the situation shifted dramatically with Rakrak's arrival. The drake, vividly recalling Rakrak's previous actions, instinctively retreated. Contrary to its expectations, Rakrak approached with a calm demeanor, offering the drake something. Even the drake was shocked to see the guy who can just kill him in an instant would be this gentle, and so little by little the drake accepted Rakrak's offer. Even the others were in shock to see the fierce drake to immediately change to a more domesticated stance. It has even extended its head for Rakrak to pat as if it was asking for more. With this, Rakrak gave it more as a reward for being well behaved, which the creature accepted without hesitation. And this gesture of Rakrak stemmed from a belief that there must be a significant reason for the god to spare the drake's life. And with this, the drake looked at Rakrak in a different light and was now comfortable with Rakrak that it even tried to ask for more. And seeing this change, Rakrak playfully teased to give more. But unfortunately, he revealed that he couldn't, because if he did just that, their food supply will deplete, leaving them with nothing left to eat. And if it really wants them to be together in the future, it needs to be patient. Surprisingly, the little drake named Menun had understood Rakrak's policy, and so it just lie and wait for another treat to come. With this, Rakrak's job here was done, and Sovi opted to leave. But before that, he told his subordinates if Menun causes trouble again, they should immediately let him know, which they understood. Then, a few moments had passed. Rakrak was now meeting with his other tribesmen, and it seems like he is inspecting a well-crafted blade by one of his men, leading him to ask if he is able to replicate this quality again, to which he proudly claims that he does, every time for that matter. And if it weren't for their previous leader's stubbornness, he would have made better blades a long time ago. This piqued Rakrak's interest, and so he asks the man the reason why their leader opposed to making such a well-crafted item. In response, the man explained that it was because of the trees. In the process of making this blade, they have to use a lot of wood. Rakrak, initially clueless about crafting weapons, he asks if this was made under the heat of a bonfire, to which the man clarified that it isn't, and that they have to burn the wood first to make the special fuel needed to make these things. With that clarified, Rakrak now knows that making these weapons are costly. Still, he isn't willing to be like the previous leader who is afraid of change and just outright refuse a great opportunity for their tribe. So he told the man who was full of scars to wait tomorrow, as he needed to further think of this before making a decision, which the man understood quite well, and so he left in silence. After that, a lizard with a single arm comes in, and it seems like he was here since he heard Rakrak is looking for a guide. Without a doubt on Rakrak's mind, he must be a wanderer, to which the guy confirmed, and he had been wandering from quite some time, hopping from place to place in the hopes of finding a place that he could call home. And because of this, he learned to see the way, a path that leads to a land that won't let them go hungry. He have a few places in mind. However, he can't guarantee whether it will still be the same. This intrigued Rakrak, so he asked if other tribesmen and wanderers can be located in there as well, to which the guy confirmed. So if that's the case, there is no reason for them not to go there, and if the inhabitants of that place are against them, all they have to do is defeat them and take over the lands. Which the guy agreed that it is a sound decision, and if that's his will, he should follow it without hesitation. Now that was settled, Rakrak asked the guy how can he give him faith in his abilities, which shocked the guy, as this was the first time a leader took interest in learning his ability. In turn, he immediately pointed up above and told them that his answer always come from them, which Rakrak initially thought the guy was talking about the sky, which the guy corrected that it's not just the sky, but a sky full of stars, leading Rakrak to ask if the stars move as he looked at it, to which he doesn't know as well, but he had set some rules that he must follow, because if one knows the path of the stars to take, one could follow the path of man without being confused. And since Rakrak doesn't know how to do that just yet, Wanderer will tell them the way of the stars this instant, and if they practice this for a few days, he will gain faith in this ability. After a few moments later, the Wanderer finished his little lesson and decided to continue this again at the same time tomorrow. However, Rakrak's duty as a leader was not finished, because Yer, the dude who was assigned to take care of the drake, had appeared, and so Rakrak instantly inquired if he is here because Manhwa is causing trouble again, to which Yer clarified that it wasn't the case, because even though Manhwa seems a little dissatisfied, since he has been giving him meals on time, he became more gentle. This was such a great news for Rakrak, as he had one less thing to take care of. However, the guy wasn't here to report just that. He was here to suggest an idea, as he had heard Jolf said they need a way to move around without starving, so when he watched him tame Manhwa with snacks, he suddenly thought of something. If it was possible to tame Manhwa, it is also possible that they could tame something else. This intrigued Rakrak once more, and so he asked the guide to broaden his explanation and give example, leading him to point it far below, onto the herd of buffalo. And with this, a system interface had popped up, notifying Nebula that Rakrek's tribe had just learned the ability to herd. This made Nebula think about history, and it is said that in human history splits into two branches at some point, one to do farming, the other is to do pastoralism. Although the source of this information is from the game, he believes that it is illogical to go with this notion, as this reality was from the game he played. But now that it comes into mind, he believes that farming would be more stable. In fact, major civilizations also started with this, but the tribe he chose was the lizardmen with a strong physique and high environmental adaptability. So what they need more is to be a pastoral society rather than farming. And in this pack, the technology that will give them wings is ironware. Luckily, Rakrek had already approved using tons of wood for the smithy to get into motion, and coupled with the guy's technique, which he crafted for many years, it was just a matter of time and effort that they finally made batches of well-sharpened blades, which Nebula was glad to see. For now, it may be softer than well-processed bronzeware, but for Rakrek's tribe who had no choice but to use stone tools, it will be a great help. Also, he had another unexpected gain, this guy and his knowledge of astronomy. Of course, it is still too primitive to be called astronomy, but in the distant future, he hoped that they put it into good use. And with that, the Wanderer taught Rakrek more about the stars that they didn't even notice how much time had passed. But because of it, Rakrek had more of an idea of what the stars hold. And he was engrossed with this knowledge that he can't look away and just continue to stare above. But now that his men had gave him so much, it was time for him to do what he can as the leader of the tribe. With this in mind, he had gathered his tribe's men in the center of the sanctuary and give a speech about their current circumstance, and that it has been a long time since God brought them to this land. They even met their brothers again, but they could have kicked them like what they did to them. They could have chosen to live on their own. Then they could have lived for a longer time in this land. But of course, those who were kicked out would have died in the wilderness. And that was wrong, because their God wanted salvation, not exclusion. That is because it benefits more people. This speech of his had moved the hearts of the people, and seeing this effect, Rakrek took this opportunity to tell them what they must do, and that is to leave this place by dawn. This in turn shocked the people, but Rakrek told them not to worry, because they are not going to wander aimlessly like last time, because they have Stargazer. This man has been telling him the movements of the stars for several days, and he had confirmed that what this person said was true. And so he was proud to announce that this man, which he now calls Stargazer, will be their guide. From now on, they will entrust the Stargazer to guide their path. But Rakrek knew that his words would not be enough to convince all of his people, and so he asked Stargazer to explain and demonstrate to everyone where he will be leading them. Which Stargazer didn't hesitate to do just that, telling them that after dawn, when the morning sun rises, they will head to the right side of the sun, and they will keep walking for 10 days straight, then another 15 days to the right again along a rotten lake, and 3 days more on a desolate mountain paths and valley paths. After walking like that, they will find their destination, where an endless forest will greet them. There will be many beasts there, and it's an area where there are packs of other races as well. This meant that it is a good area to live in. Now that was cleared up, Rakrek thanked Stargazer for the explanation, and then continued his speech by climbing the altar to make a statement. And now that all their attention was on him, he asked Yer loudly why he didn't eat any water buffalo they caught yesterday. And this was so sudden that Yer was so caught off guard that he doesn't know how to respond. But seeing that Rakrek was standing on the altar menacingly, he knew that he should take this question as serious as possible. And if he lied right now, it would be the end of him. And so even though he was nervous, he used his trembling voice to answer Rakrek's inquiry as truthful as possible, explaining why he didn't eat a boar yesterday was because he wasn't hungry, leading Rakrek to point out that everyone worked hard to catch that water buffalo, and yet he didn't eat any, which in turn made Yer more nervous from before. But he knew that if he doesn't say anything now, the others will think that he did this to disrespect them. And so he gathered all his courage to clarify that he acknowledged that everyone worked hard, but he just wasn't particularly hungry, and he was thinking that if he holds back now, then maybe later he could eat it when he is really hungry. And this is just what Rakrek wanted to hear, and so he praised Yer for a job well done. This in turn shocked everyone. Even Yer couldn't comprehend what just happened. He thought he was getting grilled, but it turns out he was doing good. And seeing their confused faces, Rakrek explained why he just complimented him, and that he appreciated his action because he was thinking of the future, and this was an excellent mindset to have. So he asked Yer again if this will continue to be the case, which Yer gladly responded that it is, and as long as he doesn't starve, he would continue to do that. And with that, Rekrak decided to compensate him with the spear they just made, shocking everyone yet again. But even before they could respond, the spear was immediately handed to Yer, which in turn made his eyes widen with awe as the spear shines, a testament of how well crafted it was. But another revelation had surprised them yet again, because those who followed Yer's words and those who resisted their desire to eat what they wanted were also worthy to be given a spear. This really made the group happy, and looking at how awesome they look with the spear, the others were starting to contemplate on following what Yer had just done. While Jal, on the other hand, was relieved to see that this was what Rekrak decided, setting an example for their people to follow. But to her surprise, Rekrak wasn't done, as he then took a skull from the altar to wear it and asked for Yer and his men to come forward one by one, as he was about to hold a knighting ceremony for them to officially be the warrior of their tribe. And with that, Yer, the bone warrior, had been born. And this is the god's will, so he should stand proud, which he was, seeing that he couldn't even contain his tears from coming out. A few moments later, the dawn had arrived, and since they were all set and ready, Rekrak announced for them to depart this holy place, and he assured them not to worry. Since their god's will is with them, that's why they are not bound to a place anymore. And so, everyone should carve the nameless beetle god into their heads. And remember that even though their path will be full of challenges, they have to move forward without fear. Just as they endured the desire to eat the water buffalo, if they endure and move forward, they will prosper, and it will benefit everyone. And they shouldn't worry, because their God will always be with them. And with Rekrak's speech, everyone's heart was moved, and so they were more eager to leave this place with hope of a promised land ahead. Meanwhile, Rekrak just took a deep breath as he asked his God to forgive him for using his name to convince his people to leave this place. But Nebula believes that there was no need for him to apologize, as he understood very well of his intentions. And if Rekrak didn't do that, he wouldn't have chosen him as a priest in the first place. Rather, he was more than glad of what Rekrak had done, as he even achieved the growth of another entity, leveling your attributes significantly. And also even Rekrak's special abilities finally saw light, as it further improved in one night. And with how Rekrak have done well so far and have not disappointed his expectations, Nebula was convinced that from now on, Rekrak will be a full-fledged start for his godhood. A few days later, the group was still traversing the wilderness, but because of the heat, Manan collapsed on the spot. So Rekrak immediately went to check up on it, but it seemed like Manan just exhausted itself. So he asked Stargazer if it was possible for them to take a rest, which Stargazer approved since it can't be helped. With this, he signaled to everyone to take a short break, which the warriors pass on the message to others. But as they rest, Rekrak overheard countless of concerns from his tribesmen, one such doubting if they could even go to the promised place he so proclaimed. They even doubt if taking a rest would gain back their strength, as they were all exhausted and they even barely ate anything, making things much worse. But Rekrak understood all of this, since they have been in the wilderness for 3 days now, and because of it, the whole group is very tired and they are running out of food. With such circumstance, they can only hope for another miracle to happen. But it seems like he doesn't have to wait for long, as one of his warriors hurriedly approached him to notify him that a flock had appeared ahead of them, and they are scaleless bastards. This story takes after a man who gets transported into a diversion he was playing and resurrected into a god named Cloud. In any case, he's not alone in this divine domain, as there were 27 other divine beings, and they need to battle to gotten to be the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it agreeing to their vision. Portion of their challenge is to discover and impact an appropriate tribe, and fortunately for Cloud, a lizardman named Rekrak was smart sufficient to realize what his eagerly were. And so, after planning what they fundamentally required, they have taken after their god's will and take off the haven to discover a bigger and more resource-rich region. Be that as it may, their travel is full of challenges, and they before long experience a modern deterrent, a gather of scaleless enemies blocking their way. Presently on to the next part, the scaleless rats they were talking approximately may be a gather of Stevie Works, and is presently energetically surging towards the lizardmen that they saw as they arranged to acquire their assets and get out of this shocking put as rapidly as conceivable. and they were sure in overcoming those reptiles as they accept that their species is more effective in terms of quality. But to their shock, these lizards aren't your normal day-to-day reptiles, and they indeed have the full group with them. With this, they right away knew they messed up, and so they fair solidified in fear. And watching their response, Rakrak couldn't offer assistance but teasingly taunt their silliness, comparing them to moths indiscriminately drawn to a fire, ignorant of the peril they were seeking. In any case, they were as well dazed to indeed react, and looking at their units, it appeared like these reptiles are more well prepared than they were. With this, the orc pioneer instantly brought down his weapon and bowed his head, and inquired Rakrak for pardoning and explained that they did not cruel to create such a big whine. They were fair in a rush as they needed to urge out of the canyon as rapidly as conceivable. This confounded Rakrak, since as he had observed the slope, there didn't appear to be an issue, and concurring to Stargazer, the canyon they were in presently would take 3 days for them to navigate, but as they had persevered everything until presently, they would without a doubt be able to persevere another 3 days. In expansion, as the environment changed, eatable things started to seem here and there, so he couldn't get it why they want to take off that slope as rapidly as conceivable. In turn, he inquired the orcs to clarify advance, which the orc master didn't delay to do fair that, clarifying to them that they wouldn't indeed think of taking off a domestic, but they were cleared out with no choice, and so they ran absent, and it was since a beast had showed up. This shocked Rakrak's gather, and in the event that the bunch of orcs were blameworthy of something, they would need to make up for it, but Rakrak thought that was superfluous, and following the rules of the wild, Jal suggested taking absent what the orcs had, but Rakrak didn't do so. Instead, fair as Jal gave Rakrak nourishment, and Rakrak gave Mana nourishment, he gave a few nourishments to the orcs as well, which the orc pioneer hadn't anticipated to be welcome, and so he bowed down so distant that his head touched the ground. Whereas Rakrak cleared out the orc to do as he satisfied, but he emphasized that it wasn't given for nothing, so if he inquires the orc to tell him more approximately the beast, which he happily will and tell him in exact points of interest. The bunch of orcs had lived nearby. They weren't able to go deeper into the mountains as there were more grounded species and particularly carnivores there. In any case, compared to the wilderness, it was simple to discover nourishment in this range, so it wasn't much of an issue for a bunch of 30 orcs. But one day, the beast showed up. The beast clearly had a difficult upper body and appeared to creep on the ground like a creepy crawly with numerous legs, and it was over 20 meters long. In the meantime, Cloud recognized precisely what it was once he listened to the portrayal. It's no question a cursed thing. The plot of the diversion, the Lost World, was that old gods had cleared out the planet. In any case, the divine beings were the only ones who had vanished, and the various species and animals that served the gods remained. Among them was the cursed thing. Essentially put, it was like a monster boss beast that showed up on the field, and whoever took the hazard and chased it would get a comparing grant. The issue is that it's dubious to bargain with for a Mu-level civilization, and the reason why he was beyond any doubt of it was simple. The cursed thing was a creation of the divine beings. Subsequently, godlikeness modifiers existed for its skills. This implied that its abilities are aiming to be incredible. It won't be that tall since it's out in the field as contradicted to interior a dungeon, but considering its fundamental abilities and uncommon capacities, it'll be more grounded than Rakrak with plus D3, and in case they had a break even with battle, Rakrak would likely be harmed, and indeed in the event that he didn't, the rest of the warriors would endure wounds. With this, Cloud was considering in the event that he ought to allow them to indicate to require a reroute. Be that as it may, it wasn't very a great thought to do that either, since Rakrak's clan and the group of buffaloes were all losing vitality. But to Nebula's surprise, Rarak demonstrated himself once more why he was chosen by him. As if Rakrak had a comparable thought to him, Rakrak called out Stargazer and inquired him in case there's a way they can go around, to which Stargazer reacted that there are, but they would have to go back to the wild and walk around the mountain for 8 days. Right away, Rakrak shook his head as in the event that he didn't like what he listened. So, it appears like they can't run absent without indeed seeing what their rival is like. But as they had dreaded, it was undoubtedly solid. It was almost 15 meters long, which was smaller than what the orc had portrayed, but it was in no way little. The body was prolonged and covered by a difficult external shell. It indeed had a combine of venomous teeth, Hanging from the beat of the external skin was a half-destroyed stone structure, which implied that the old individuals had served this creature. The greenery that secured the structure gave away how ancient the animal was, and its godlikeness level was at 3. And since its fundamental strength was 120, it would still be more grounded than Rekrak indeed in case divine control was used. And indeed, in spite of the fact that Rekrak's gather couldn't see the creature's stats, they appeared intimidated by the antiquated Coleoptera because it turned its body under the valley. And it didn't offer assistance that its unimportant developments shake the ground, and it indeed revealed to them by the Orc Master that turbulence was caused by the animal fair moving in its rest. With this, you inquire Rekrak in case they ought to run absent. In any case, Rekrak knows all too well that it would be exorbitant. With this, Rekrak was not beyond any doubt on what to do another. But as they were waiting for Rekrak to choose, Joel was assessing her environment and noticed the tremendous boulder fair sitting on the edge of the slope. And so, she quickly approaches Rekrak and told him that they must battle, since they have the advantage. This led Cloud to require intrigue in Joel's supposition, and so he briefly took a see at her stats, revealing to him that she has the mediator course. This meant that one is trusted by the clan, which he as of now knew, but her insights level is higher than Rekrak's, and it keeps on rising. But the foremost interesting thing is her uncommon capacity, intuition. It was an extraordinary capacity that hadn't popped up until recently. It was maybe recently made due to recent experiences. With this, Cloud held up for Joel's next words. To his shock, Joel talked around what the Iron Craftsmen did to warm the press, until presently, they have been blowing disgust with their mouths, waving their hands, or tearing huge pieces of bark and fanning them. Be that as it may, the press expert appears to utilize a different strategy. An extraordinary instrument called howls. It was able to blow much more wind and was more helpful. And with just this, Rekrak get what Joel's attempting to convey, which by utilizing apparatuses, less control can be utilized to extend more power. But the issue was, they do not have an apparatus just like the bellows. 2. That device was made by the skilled worker after he considered it for a long time. In reaction, Joel clarified that they won't require such advanced apparatus. A basic apparatus will be more than sufficient, as the monster they ought to bargain with is resting at the foot of that slope, and they are at a much higher rise. They are no distinctive than experts sitting in front of fashion. So, in the event that they fair prepare and act appropriately, they will be able to warm the metal. And with fair some minutes of planning, the warriors were presently positioned adjacent to the boulders that Rekrak had pointed to. They weren't barehanded. They found and uprooted a number of tall trees within the region and were each holding one in its aggregate to roll the boulders and smashing it to passing. It was undoubtedly a basic arrange, but a range that required creative ability. Indeed, Rekrak thought going up against and battling it confront to face was the as-it-were way. But Joel, on the other hand, thought in an unexpected way. Joel didn't know precisely how to specific it, but she was using her information to demonstrate with genuine activities that moving huge things with small quality was conceivable. And, in Nebula's eyes, her information can be alluded to as physics to systematize it, as she's essentially applying the standards of mass and motor vitality nearby positional energy and use. But that didn't crew Joel what all of a sudden ended up a physicist. In any case, fair as the press craftsman's aptitudes affected Joel's instinct, one occasion might impact numerous people, which could be a great thing for Cloud, so he energetically looked at each move. And since everything was prepared, the warriors quickly went into activity. Be that as it may, the boulders didn't move right away, and so Joel signaled to a beat, which was successful as the boulders slowly begun to shake increasingly. And it was not long until a boulder rolled over the edge. But to capture a shellfish of that level, it would be way better on the off chance that all the rocks hit at the same time. In any case, it wasn't the case, as they as it were overseed to hurl one, which wasn't sufficient. It fair enraged the animal, and so it immediately crept up the slope to assault them. And indeed, with its expansive body, this mofo was quick, and with this, Cloud knew that it was as well late, and so he took over Rekrak's body with divine control. Right away, Rekrak effectively pushed the moment boulder that was approximately to roll over the edge with awesome constraint. At that point, he continued to thrust the third boulder difficult, which wasn't moving effortlessly due to it being the biggest one out of the three. Still, with Nebula interior of him, he had overseen to thrust it to the edge, but still, Rekrak knew that the animal would not fair run towards the boulder head-on, so he clasped his skewer and hopped from the mountain ridge, flying 300 meters over the discus, and tossed the stick with all his might. With this, the spear shot through the discus like a ray of light and entered through the antiquated Coleoptera's shell. And indeed, in spite of the fact that it was a little wound, it was sufficient to limit its development for a minute. With this, the old Coleoptera got in the boulder like it was on a promo, a purchase one take one at that. As a result, the boulder directly landed on the old Coleoptera's head. It kicked the bucket in a moment. After seeing the passing of the monster creature, the bunch thundered for Rekrak, the warriors, and for the great creepy crawly god. In the interim, Cloud was enchanted of the result, but it wasn't the expanded confidence focuses that mattered. His holiness level hadn't changed as leveling up had gotten slower, and there wasn't much XP. What truly mattered was the thing he picked up from it, the pith of horrifying presence. When it came to being a god, their most noteworthy control was the ability to create something. Fair as Cloud was able to form sufficient hatchlings to bolster the lizardmen due to his little range, the creepy crawlies. Each god was able to create assets concurring to their ranges by utilizing confidence focuses. Be that as it may, to form something that doesn't exist in the world, resources that were similarly exceptional had to be utilized, and that would be the pith of cursed thing. And with this essence, it would be conceivable to make a creature. These animals are confidence assets generators that spread the word of God through their exceptionally existence. Also, growth is conceivable. And if one raises it to a higher level, it will obtain the title apostles or incarnations and might be utilized as valuable vital weapons input of God's will. And if the creation strategy itself is the same as the past game, then he would effortlessly be able to make an animal, which in turn made him wonder what to create. However, he chosen to not make one right absent because it costs a lot to preserve within the starting, and it is superior to form an animal at another time, indeed in the event that all the essential assets had been collected. For presently, it was a need to utilize confidence focuses to offer assistance Rekrak and the Gather. But at slightest Cloud had learned that the creature maker program that was in the diversion, the misplaced world, was too accessible to him presently. So he cleared out the program window open within his view. In the interim, Jal draws nearer the defeated monster, curious in case they could use the meat of this beast as nourishment. She cut off the tip of the ancient Coleoptera's foot. In any case, the smell of it wasn't wonderful. Still, it wasn't especially a sign not to eat it, so she puts it into her mouth sometime recently, promptly spitting it out. But she admits that the taste isn't that terrible, and it's edible as well. Be that as it may, it is still troublesome to eat it crude. This driven her to ponder in the event that it was conceivable to include other fixings, similar to a consumable fragrant grass, and cook it over a fire. And with a few minutes afterward, she had cooked up a supper made from the legs of the creature, in which Rekrak consumed with caution. But as the meat touched his taste buds, he was shocked that it was edible, in spite of the fact that a bit insipid. The smell of it was very decent, and seeing his response, Jal gladly called it cooking. She topped the meat with eatable scented herbs and cooked it over fire, which Rekrak acknowledged that she thought of an arrangement this speedy, since he had been considering tossing the monster's carcass all absent since the scent was so strong. But with her cooking, it appears like their list of eatable nourishment broadened, and so he incited asking if she might moreover instruct him how to cook, which she reacted that she seems, in any case, sometime recently, that she needs to address a concern that occupied her intellect for a while, which she saw the orc pioneer earlier also had a successor, and because Rekrak could be a pioneer as well, he as well ought to discover a companion before long. This sudden proposal of hers instantly solidified him up, and the meat that he was eating got stuck in his throat, but he was able to swallow it due to the extraordinarily wide throats lizardmen were born with. Still, he was tossed off by Joel's words, as he had never cared much approximately finding a companion for the past few a long time. He was distracted with his concerns approximately God, the tribe, and surviving in common. But sometime recently, he seems indeed think of a reaction. Jal pointed out that he is getting ancient, so it is necessary for soundness of the tribe. And seeing that she was serious about this, her man up and composed himself and inquired Jal in the event that what she meant was an accomplice, to which she affirmed, and on the off chance that he had never truly think around it. At that point, how about he considers her? But since of how sudden this all was, he wasn't beyond any doubt how he ought to answer. Luckily sufficient, something else happened that he needed to go. There lay the altar broken by the boulder, and interior of it, something was shining, reflecting light from the sunset. Among the parts of the altar was a tablet made of gold. This was a shock to Cloud, but the golden tablet that Rekrek found was a really common relic. If one was fortunate sufficient to chance upon an old ruin, they may discover a library of calligraphic works that was full of composed language from that time. The old individuals composed approximately each small thing, so it would be considered great luck in the event that the works they found weren't simply about building houses or other minor things. Be that as it may, typically a better-than-average discover, Rekrek and the bunch didn't know what it said on the golden tablet, as they didn't know what the characters implied. But to the player, all data was uncovered. The inscription on the brilliant tablet is an introduction to the antiquated civilization that was once called the Kalimbar Empire. It generally comprises of works almost the significance of the Kalimbar domain and its accomplishments, so there isn't much vital data to be gathered. All things considered, aside from its esteem as a source of information about an old civilization, it gives a hint about other old remains of the Kalimbar realm. But civilization needs to be a lot more progressed to interpret it, and because the misplaced world was full of antiquated civilizations, it wouldn't be essential to reach the level of development of advanced civilization on soil, where a system to translate Egyptian hieroglyphics can be established based on the famous Rosetta Stone. Nevertheless, an assorted society with archaeologists, linguists, universities, and adequate information of an assortment of civilizations was required. So right presently, the tablet is no diverse from trash, but since the golden tablet itself was a bit of exceptionally glossy metal, it pulled in the consideration of the lizardmen. Ur indeed picked it up and attempted to eat it, but to his alarm, Stargazer uncovered to him that he couldn't do that since it may be a metal called gold, and it is said that the color does not alter or rot indeed after a long time. That's why they are a small more profitable. Be that as it may, gold was a delicate metal and would serve them no superior to press right now. It would be worth having the precious metal as decoration, but that sort of craftsmanship was unfamiliar to the lizardmen compared to other species. With that clarified, Ur was still hungry, so Stargazer proposed to capture a deer. Its meat is sweet and delicious, and they have heard that the orcs have found expensive track prior, so they should go now before the night comes. And so, the others decided to take off and toss the tablet and just set it aside. Be that as it may, Rekrek did not expect it to toss it absent. It appeared that Rekrek really enjoyed the brilliant tablet, and so he told the others to go without him while he considers about what to do with this tablet. And he was so charmed with it, since everything passes on, decays and vanish, there's nothing within the world that does not alter. But this brilliant tablet does not decay. So Rekrek's got a feeling that those who made this tablet attempted to protect something on it, but he doesn't have a single clue where to begin, and so Be Fair stared at it for a small whereas. A couple of minutes afterward, Jaw returned to tell him that everybody is prepared for bed. But Rekrek saw this as an advantageous minute to look for Joel's conclusion. And so, he told her approximately what he considers of this tablet, and seeing that she completely caught on where he was getting at, Rekrek pointed out that he moreover taken note there are rules to the inscriptions, as there were shapes that are the same. This in turn made Joel point out that it is comparable to the chasing marks their warriors make, and similar to how he is the as it were lizardman wearing a high coat, which she particularly told him to wear, which is since she needed him to have an unmistakable thing that set him separated, an image as the tribal pioneer. With this, his understanding broadens, but still it was as well early for him to realize what these symbols meant, and so few hours had passed, and he was still before the yielded deer, and is still looking eagerness at the tablet. In the meantime, Cloud saw a slight plausibility. With his bolster, Rekrek could be able to concoct primitive letters, especially when Rekrek's determination was tall, so he was likely to continue paying consideration to something that he was interested in, and so he gave it an attempt. But a god giving coordinate information to their tribe would devour an extraordinary sum of confidence focuses, but giving insights was no diverse from an ordinary marvel. And with this, Rekrek saw something unusual. It appeared that the bugs were moving, agreeing to certain designs, as in case there was an imperceptible hand directing them. These visualizations showed up and vanished a few times before Rekrek's eyes. He thought the railing movement appeared commonplace, and his realization wasn't distant off. He was considering that the development of these bugs is comparable to the inscriptions that the antiquated individuals made on the golden tablet. With this, Rekrek thought of many things and drew on the ground with an adhere. To begin with, he replicated the characters on the brilliant tablet. Then, he doodled things that weren't letters or images, and before long after, he eradicated the lines that he had cleared out on the ground with his hands, misplaced in his considerations. Presently, he was considering that it might not be the gold that won't rot with this brilliant tablet, but could be something else. And with this, he had gone through the night composing on the ground with the adhere, and when morning arrived, Rakrek went to Joel's tent and woke her up, which she at first thought that there may be something off base, but Rakrek clarified that he has something to appear her, and Rakrek appeared to some degree energized. So, she chosen to take after him, and as they went over to a clear ground, Rakrek begun composing. He to begin with drew a triangle and 2 perpendicular lines with the adhere, and clarified to Joel that this was him, a male reptile. This interested Joel, so she inquires to clarify advance. So, at that point, Rakrek drew a rearranged triangle and 2 lines, and explained that this was her, to be exact, a female reptile. And seeing that Joel caught on what he implied, Rakrek at that point continued to draw 2 lines between the 2 drawings. Rakrek felt noiseless after drawing these 2 lines, so Joel had no choice but to inquire to begin with. In response, with a truer tone, Rakrek clarified that this image implied getting to be each other's companion, and usually, moreover, his answer to what she inquired. With this, they looked at each other's eyes intently, but Joel felt that something is lost in those images that Rakrek composed, so she took the adhere from Rakrek and drew a circle. And Joel inquired Rakrek in the event that he gets what this implies, and with certainty, he replied that he does. And with that, the 2 reptiles fell in hush beneath the delicate light of the early sun, as they were within the minute of clarity, consolation, and a feeling of being precisely where they were implied to be. This story follows a man who gets transported into a game he was playing, reincarnating into a god named Nebula. However, he's not alone in this divine realm, as there are 27 other gods, and they have to fight to become the sole ruler of the planet and reshape it according to their vision. Part of their challenge is to find and influence a suitable tribe, and luckily for Nebula, a lizardman named Rakrek was insightful enough to realize what his intentions were. And so, after preparing what they necessarily needed, they followed their god's will and left the sanctuary. However, their path was filled with dangers, as they have to defeat an abomination in order to continue traversing it. Luckily, with Joel's intelligence and the power of their god, they managed to kill it without them losing any of their men. And because of this, they even gained a tablet that contained the language of ancient inhabitants. And with this, Rakrek had invented writing. And Rakrek got that dog in him, as he used this newfound skill to riz up that shoddy that was always supporting him. Now on to the next part. A system notification popped up notifying Nebula that Rakrek had indeed invented writing. And so Nebula cheered in joy on the inside, as there was no one to even watch him if he expressed it. However, it will still take lots of generations to develop more. Nevertheless, it was still the beginning stage of the game. Now, Nebula just has to enjoy the show, because as Rakrek and Joel decide to be each other's companion, the clan celebrates this matter with a festival. On the surface, it might seem like a simple hunt, but capturing the largest prey to present to their spouse is how lizardmen celebrate their wedding ceremonies. And Rakrek once again proved his eligibility as a companion by offering the largest deer to his bride. But to their surprise, Joel had managed to catch a deer as well, but she made it look so easy compared to how Rakrek did. Even Nebula couldn't hold a faint laugh to come out. It seems like Rakrek would have an interesting married life. After the wedding, Rakrek gave the land back to the orcs, which the orc couldn't believe what he just heard, and so he asked Rakrek if he was sure. Confidently, Rakrek answered that he was, as the monster was an obstacle they had to defeat after all, and he also mentioned this was their land to begin with, so they can just live here again just like they used to. With this, the orc lord couldn't help his tears to come out. He didn't expect someone to be this kind, and so with all his heart, he bowed to Rakrek and expressed how thankful he was. Now they owe him and his clan a great favor, and he would like to repay it. And since they are planning to go deeper on the mountains, he offered that his son lead the way for them, as they have lived here for a long time, so they know a path through the mountains that is wider and isn't as rugged. To which Rakrek gladly nodded at the generous gesture. But before they could leave, the orc lord thanked Rakrek once more, because before this, they used to live while being pestered by bigger beasts and larger tribes. But because of him, they might just be able to overcome it, and they will never forget this favor. This made Rekrak smile, and so he nodded in understanding. And just like that, Rekrak and his clan went on their way in a hurry. Everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, Nebula knew this game wasn't that easy. The reason why there were so many random encounters and negative events in the Lost World is probably because it is based on a real world, and he can already foresee what the next event will be. And just like what Nebula had expected, just within the next few days, Rekrak learned of another tribe not too far away that was also constantly scouting for danger around them. Rekrak didn't recognize the footprints, but the Starcatcher did. It's a frog footprint. Rekrak knew much when it came to the frogs. They were slippery, swam well, jumped up and down, and some even had poison. And he knew all this because they are able to eat the ones with poison now after God gave them his blessing. And many frogs lived in the ponds, and when the end of winter came, they would run out of food and had to come out of hibernation. The lizardmen would catch and eat them. The footprints looked similar to the ones left by those frogs the lizardmen had eaten, but were very different in size. And so Stargazer clarified that it came from the frogmen, a species that walks on two legs. They can also speak and think like them. This surprised Rekrak, as frogmen were a rare sight given their natural habitats were few and far between, such as rivers and lakes. Even for lizardmen with their wide range of activities, frogmen were hard to come by. And so Rekrak eagerly searched through the bushes and counted the footprints. To his surprise, there isn't just one, but quite a bit of them. With this number, it seemed like they are a larger tribe than them. And this footprint indicates that they must be scouting as well. This prompts Rekrak to ask Stargazer if these frogmen are belligerent, to which he responds that they might be, as they made their home here first. But that's not always the case. They're the same as any other bipedal species. Some are good and some are bad. With this, Rekrak decided to return to their temporary base to discuss this with others. After the meeting was done, Rekrak told everyone to set up their camps as wide as possible. This idea that came from Joel had a purpose to deceive the frogmen into thinking their clan is large when seen from the outside. There are lots of trees, so it's easy to make a fire. And they will have a bunch of guards keep an eye on the fires at night, and if they make more fires here and there, the frogmen will think their group is twice the actual size despite the fires not being of use. It will also be good to keep watch at night, keeping in mind that the warriors will go on a reconnaissance. This was a sound idea. However, Rekrak pointed out that the work should be equally distributed amongst the lizardmen staying guard so that no one complains. Which she understood, and with that, a few moments had passed by, and their plans had come into reality. And now they felt more confident to take rest even though the other tribe will be watching them. And true to their expectations, just beyond the mountains, several frog silhouettes could be seen, and a few days had passed, they switched bases. Fortunately, they did not encounter any frogmen, and during that time, they had prepared a lot of things to ensure the tribe's safety. At this point, Nebula even doubts there are many players who are more successful than him, as cattle breeding went smoothly, and their housing lifestyles were quickly evolving to adapt to the changed environment. The most fascinating thing was how quickly they established the concept of writing, and that is all thanks to Rekrak, who was actively using the written language he had recently discovered. When the warriors came back from reconnaissance, he would always listen to what they saw at the big wide rock in the middle of the village, and he will always mark the shape of the river onto the large rock. On the rock, the village was marked at the center, and distances were marked based on a particular scale to show the topography of the area. To be exact, it was a map that was developed from hunting marks, but the idea of making a permanent record like written language was applied. This record was actually useful, helping the warriors that were split into groups to figure out the surrounding terrains while Rekrak was away. And this served as an opportunity for the clan to become interested in the utility of writing and records, which were made possible because their now more stable lifestyles allowed them more spare time. Rather than having them overwork themselves, Rekrak recommended keeping written records as they went about their various activities. As an example, he told them they could each write down how many pieces of fruit they had collected every day so that it was possible to know exactly who worked less and who worked more. And once the lizardmen started recording things, the ones who were more diligent reduced the amount they collected by a reasonable margin rather than criticizing their fellow lizardmen, while those who fell short collected more. This proved to be effective in improving everyone's productivity. It was just as Rekrak had expected. However, he gained more insights than he had expected. He realized that when they relied on their memories, they would live by compromising. It caused emotional stress since some were more diligent while others got lazy. And no one was able to say anything because there was no clear evidence. Now though, everyone is being careful as they know records are permanent. And although Raikrek's idea hadn't been recognized by the game system, Nebula noticed what Raikrek's idea stemmed from. A simple discovery was meaningless. Once the culture of writing and recording began, they could do a greater variety of things than before, and realizing the importance of this idea was the first step. With this, Nebula was delighted as they're doing better than he thought they would, and Nebula hadn't been able to pay much attention to Raikrek's clan recently. Even though Raikrek's clan was Nebula's only tribe, he had many other things to do, just like in the game of the Lost World, as gods had many more responsibilities outside of managing their tribes. Nebula currently has 3 large swarms of insects. These swarms weren't simply controlled by Nebula. Each group had grown into their own entity. One of these swarms was the swarm of locusts in the west that indirectly benefited Raikrek and his clan. These locusts focused on disrupting and eliminating factors that could pose a threat or create unnecessary variables to Raikrek's clan. And the second swarm of insects, which Raikrek and his clan weren't even aware of, were in the far south of the forest. In the game, there was a trick called small area XP farming, and the south of the forest was dedicated for this. At this place, Nebula were creating and cultivating all kinds of insects to transform the area into a nest full of insects. Because of this, Nebula was able to level up his small area from 3 to 4, which in turn gave him a new skill. But this is a method he wouldn't have dreamed of doing if there were other players nearby, because they definitely wouldn't just watch and do nothing at the sight of this kind of farming. But because Nebula's starting location was on the outer part of the peninsula, it seemed that other players hadn't discovered it yet, and he definitely has to take advantage of the fact that he started in an area with only a few other players. But if other players were around, there would be many technical benefits from a clash of civilizations, just like when Raikrek's clan and the Blue Skin tribe met. So rather than Nebula being ahead of the other players, it could be said that he was trying to make up for potential losses, at least for now. And the fact that Raikrek's capability and the status of the tribe are currently above average, so he was more confident to get ahead of others. But this is just the beginning, because what will happen next will be even more dangerous than anything ever experienced. So then, Nebula observed the first encounter between the two tribes, as one of Raikrek's warriors went up to him and notified him that the frogmen were coming towards them. In response, Raikrek reminded the warrior of the importance of providing detailed information in such reports, specifically the number of enemies, their armament, and the speed of their approach. The warrior quickly apologized for the oversight and then provided the necessary details. There were 7 in the group, all of them were armed, and they were slowly making their way towards them. And there is one more thing that even Raikrek was briefly surprised by what the warrior said, but he decided not to think too deeply about it before he saw and judged things for himself. And being armed but approaching on foot means there's a chance for conversation. Their numbers are also small. With this, Raikrek decided to lead 10 armed warriors to meet the frogmen before they reached the village. He took 10 because they needed more numbers for safety, but they also shouldn't look intimidating just to have a conversation. And as the two tribes met at a small clearing in the forest, the warriors had been observing and delivering information about the frogmen until now, so their first sight of the frogmen wasn't completely unfamiliar. Their skin was slippery, and they were somewhat smaller than lizardmen. They were characterized by their large eyes and transparent eyelids, and their short necks and bodies that looked hard and firm seemed common for frogmen. And Raikrek confirmed that the special note relayed by the warrior was true. There were 6 frogmen, and next to them was a lizardman with grayish-brown scales, which made him think about the possibility that this was an effort to make peace. And seeing the tension between the group, the leader of the frogmen broke the ice by introducing himself first. He called himself Shunin, son of the great tribe leader, Aloy, and they have no intention of fighting them. Seeing that these frogmen were courteous in their own way, Raikrek also introduced himself, and he also emphasized that they have no intention of raising their weapons. And as the two leaders spoke to each other, both tribes that were standing guard returned to a resting position. Still, Raikrek couldn't help but think it would have been better if the tribal leader had come himself, but Raikrek didn't expect that much, so he gets straight to the point and asked them the reason they were here. To which Shunin explained that they have come to let them know that his tribe has invaded their territory. It was just as Raikrek had expected. There was no need to accept Shunen's words as an attack. After all, only by stating that their opponent was in the wrong could one press for an advantage. Still, Rekrek knew how to deflect this, so he stated that he wouldn't say the whole land is their territory, as there was no sign suggesting that this land had an owner already, and therefore they didn't know, but he apologized for not noticing they were here first. And Shunen didn't say anything for a moment after Rekrek made a clear apology, as he recognized that Rekrek had gotten one over on him. And seeing their reactions, Rekrek continued to clarify things up. He stated that their circumstance is a bit different, as they have come from a place very far away. He is not sure if they will settle down long term, but they need to stay here for now as they have no other place to go. This made Shunen stutter as he doesn't know how to respond. But Rekrek did, and Sovi used his glib tongue to state that is his first time seeing frogmen. But Shunen, son of the great tribal leader Aloy, seemed like a warrior capable of making decisions and is the only one who has the authority to show them mercy and grant their request. And Shunen couldn't come up with anything contrarian, so he ended up agreeing with Rekrek. He was even proud to boast that this is possible with his authority as the next leader of the tribe. And as Shunen was dancing on the top of Rekrek's palm, he noticed the big warrior standing beside Shunen glancing at him. It was a look of dissatisfaction. With this, he figured out that the tribal chief probably assigned that warrior to his son because he doesn't trust him, while keeping a closer watch on them, but he still has a lot of questions in mind, and therefore he decided to be extra careful in collecting information. With this in mind, Rekrek suggested that instead of talking here, Shunen should come to their village to be welcomed since both tribes have come to an agreement without much conflict. And when Shunen was about to go along with what Rekrek had suggested, the big warrior whispered something into Shunen's ear. Shunen's attitude suddenly changed, so instead of going with Rekrek's idea, he just stated that they don't have a lot to thank each other for, and he doesn't think they have that much mutual trust built yet. Still, Rekrek couldn't let them leave just yet, so he stated that lizardmen can't just send Shunen off after being indebted to him for what he has done for them. So he suggested we have a meal at this spot instead. And before Shunen could respond, he turned to the big warrior, and the warrior nodded. With this, Rekrek and Shunen are now sitting across each other while they are waiting for the deer to be cooked. But now that Rekrek was able to let them stay a little longer, his mind was preoccupied on how to find out more about the relationship between that single lizard with these frogmen, and what their intentions were in coming together. But he can't let them know that he is curious, because if they realize he wants to know more, they'll use it to their advantage. With this in mind, Rekrek started a casual conversation with Shunen. He stated that he may accept that the land around here is the frogman territory, but he wants to know on what grounds they are saying this. This prompted Shunen to point out the decorative feathers hanging around his neck and stated with pride that these are the feathers of the cockatrice that lives in a forest nearby. But as expected, Rekrek doesn't have a clue on what that is, so Shunen explained that they are dangerous animals who live around this forest. Huge birds that walk on their 2 feet. They are not just large in size but poisonous as well, and it is very difficult for them to catch, and they never manage to kill it in their many encounters, but only barely chase it away. Aside from their speed, they also have a wide range of movement. They are the reason why they keep watch around the area. And because of Shunen's descriptions, Rekrek was curious on how they managed to deal with the cockatrice. So he asked Shunen if they use a javelin as a weapon. But this just made Shunen smirk, knowing the fact that they are far above these lizardmen, as the only long-range weapon they could think of is a javelin. And Rekrek also noticed Shunen's subtle smugness. Still, it didn't bother him as he was more curious on what these frogmen could offer. And so he let Shunen be the smuggler that he was. And as expected, Shunen excitedly wanted to show off their weapon, the bow and arrow, and Rekrek took interest in the weapon he hadn't heard of, and the lizardmen hadn't seen a bow before since they grew up in places where there weren't many species of trees and thus were short on wood supplies. And so he looked at Shunen intently. Surprisingly, Shunen called out the lizard with them, who was named Owen, asking him a favor if Owen could bring him his bow and arrow, to which Owen gladly responded that he would. And seeing that Shunen was considerate of the lizard, it left a positive impression on Rekrek. And after Owen handed the bow to him, Shunen asked Owen once again to set up an appropriately sized wooden board on the tree nearby so that he could practice his archery, which Owen gladly did. But with just this, Rekrek's impression of them immediately changed, as he noticed a strange power relation between Shunin and the lizardman Owen. Shunin acts like he's asking a favor, but it seems to him that Owen is an errand boy. However, anyone compared to the son of the tribal chief would seem like an errand boy. So he didn't say anything, and just observed Owen do his work and watched Shunin's archery practice. The arrow Shunin shot flew with a whoosh and struck the middle of the target. This impressed Rekrak, and as Rekrak admired Shunin's skills, he was also picturing in his head how to respond if they were to fight the frogmen. But as he was thinking this, Shunin then boasted about how they learned archery from when they were young, and he is one of the best archers in their tribe, which Rekrak responded in kind, but he was more curious on how to handle the bow, so he asked Shunin if he could also use this weapon called bow, to which Shunin gladly handed the bow to him, but he emphasized to Rekrak that it will be hard since it's his first time after all. But Rekrak didn't hear a single thing that Shunin had said, as he was more enticed with the weapon that he was holding. And as he inspected the weapon, he noticed the branch and string are definitely sturdy. Its power is weak compared to a javelin, but he can carry a few arrows around. It's also a lot more precise than a javelin and has a faster attack speed. It's a weapon they absolutely need, and therefore he would like to look into this roughly to his heart's content, but as Shunin stated, his skills with the bow were trash. Strength wasn't an issue, it was a skill issue, because a beginner is still a beginner even if they are strong. So Rekrak couldn't hit shit, just like how a stormtrooper starts their daily training, and he missed his shot like the plank of wood had plot armor. Still, Shunin was kind enough to say inspiring words and avoid saying anything rude. But as Rekrak was still inspecting the bow, Shunin asks Owen what is he doing not collecting the arrows, and so Owen ran immediately to collect it, while Shunin was somewhat irritated by the fact that he still has to remind Owen of this. But this was a great opportunity for Rekrak, and so he explained to Shunin that he shot those arrows, and therefore he should have been the one to go pick them, which Shunin was caught off guard by this, since Rekrak was a leader after all. But this might be just the way of the lizardmen, so he let Rekrak do what he pleases. And as Rekrak picked up an arrow from the ground, Shunin shrugged and shifted his gaze to where the meal was being prepared. With this, Rekrak picked up another arrow and approached Owen, but Owen panicked like he didn't know how he should behave in front of Rekrak. He thinks that it was a strange reaction, but still, Rekrak went through with his plan and tried to interrogate Owen, asking why is a lizardman like him with the frogmen. Owen stuttered a while before fencing his voice to explain it was because lizardmen and frogmen are living together, and they are different species living together. Rekrak was thrown off as he never imagined such a thing would be possible. If different species lived together, their differing lifestyles would inevitably lead to conflicts. Rekrak didn't think of frogmen this way, but some other species would be disgusted by the physiological aspect of frogmen. Even if a friendly relationship was maintained, it was normal for communities to divide, and so Rekrak asks Owen to explain further, to which Owen did, and it was because both species are of help to each other. This was a surprise to Rekrak, and so out of pure curiosity, he asked Owen to be specific about it, and Owen replied as if he had rehearsed what to say, stating that in exchange for receiving protection from frogmen, lizards can help out by doing tasks that are inconvenient for the frogmen, as frogmen can't live outside of water for too long. Lizardmen are also better than frogmen at climbing trees or picking fruits, and lizardmen in return can eat the fish in the water. What Owen had said sounded like they were helping each other, but something was strange to Rekrak, and there was no doubt sharing food is good. But Rekrak pointed out to Owen that lizardmen don't need protection, because lizardmen have the ability to defend themselves. This made Owen shake his head, but he seemed surprised, as he panickily tried to convince Rekrak that this forest is dangerous, and always frogmen are a big tribe. It will be hard for the lizardmen to survive without the frogmen, and Rekrak wanted to ask more, but he was starting to feel the weight of Shunin's gaze, and he doesn't like what he heard, so he tells Owen to forget the conversation they just had, and just pretended that he only asked about how to be good at archery. Afterwards, the two groups ate while having small talk, but as soon as Shunin got to eat the meat, he was gladly surprised by the flavor that was in it. Just by adding fragrant herbs, it made the meat even more delicious. And seeing that Shunin knows how to enjoy a large juicy meat, Rekrak asks Shunin if he had ever tried a water buffalo, which made Shunin more excited than before as he had eaten one, but it's been a while since he had caught one. but even still he could remember how delicious it tastes. And since Shunin was visibly interested in the buffaloes they had, he asked if Shunin is willing, they could trade for a pouch of arrows, to which Shunin was about to agree. However, he instantly changed his mind as soon as he noticed the facial expression of one of his guards glaring at him intently. So it seems like there was no chance they would trade even a single bow. But Raykrek just reacted stoically as to not garner some suspicions from Shunin's guards. Still, Shunin just broke the tension again, clarifying that they will delve into those discussions when their friendly relations deepen, and likely it would not be too far off. As they could see, the members of their own tribe do not bear hostility with lizardmen. They're being friendly to not just Aowen, who came here with them, but the rest of the lizard warriors, and that's all because the two races live together in their village. To further prove this, Shunin called out Owen and asked him to explain to Raykrek how they have spent the past few months helping each other out, which Owen was glad to be of service as long as it will promote friendship between them. But Raykrek just looked at Owen with suspicious eyes, because as expected, they brought it up so easily as if they had prepared for this beforehand. And if Raykrek hadn't interrogated Owen first, he would have believed every word that came out of Shunin's mouth. And like Owen, Shunin also seemed to have a speech prepared, which raised Raykrek's suspicion even more. And after that facade was over, Raykrek offered for the two tribes to meet again. Such events were mainly for tribes to exchange or share food to make them closer. Shunin gladly accepted the offer, prompting Raykrek to suggest meeting them somewhere a bit closer to their tribe next time, instead of having them come from afar, which Shunin was about to accept. But just like before, standing next to Shunin was Oboy the guard, and once again he interrupted before he could accept Raykrek's offer. So Shunin immediately changed his decision, and now he stated that this place is fine, and there is nothing that blocks their vision, and it's a good place for both tribes to keep an eye on each other, which Raykrek just accepted to avoid further tension between the two tribes. And with that, the two tribes decided when to meet and went their separate ways, and Raykrek saw Owen glancing back at him a few times through the group of frogmen returning home. This was enough of a confirmation that there is definitely something going on. Even Jal saw through their lies, as they were too obvious. The way they act doesn't look like the relationship of people on an equal footing. Part of their challenge is to find and influence a suitable tribe, and luckily for Nebula, a lizardman named Raykrek was insightful enough to realize what his intentions were. And so, after preparing what they necessarily needed, they followed their god's will and leave the sanctuary. However, their path was filled with dangers as they encounter another tribe totally different from them. They are the frogmen. They even have advanced weapon that the lizard tribe doesn't have, the bow. But what's more surprising is that they also had a lizardman with them who they treat as an equal. But with the insightful eyes of Raykrek and his wife, they saw through their lies. With this, the frogmen had failed to entice the lizardmen to live together with them, and therefore they just leave, and just plan to meet again. Now on to the next part. A few hours later, along the lake where Aloy's frogmen settled down and made home, Owen, the lizardman, collapsed on a small sandy beach, as he was slapped hard by Shunin, accusing Owen of revealing confidential information to the lizardman's tribe leader because of how worried they were. And knowing that saying the truth wouldn't do him good, Owen bowed his head and clarified to them that the tribe leader of the lizardmen only asked him how to be a good archer, and he only answered that question. But the warrior Oboy found it ridiculous as Owen couldn't even shoot an arrow properly, so he then kicked Owen on the side while Shunin just watched. Then Owen tumbled on the ground with a grunt, but even with this, Owen still explained to them that he only told him that he could use a bow so that it wouldn't make the lizardman's tribe leader less suspicious of them, which was a sound reasoning for Shunin. And seeing their demeanor change, Owen explained further that the lizardman's tribe leader then kept asking how a bow is made as he didn't think the frogman would tell him. But he said that he couldn't tell him because he was in great debt to the frogman. And if he really wanted to learn archery, he told him that he should pay a fee first, but he said regretfully that he couldn't give him anything right away and gave up asking. With this, Shunin was impressed of how shrewd Owen is, and so Shunin looked at Oboy, signaling that he thinks that would be enough, which Oboy also thinks as well. And, as if nothing happened, Shunin praised Owen, as expected from the shark trickster they knew of. And as Owen felt relieved that the interrogation was done, Shunin reminded Owen that his role in this was big, which he understood quite well. And seeing Shunin was talking with his head turned towards the lake, Owen followed his gaze. There was a small island in the middle of the lake, on which were a few huts obscured by bushes. The frogmen warriors took turns surveilling the area closely. Young lizardmen were trapped inside of the huts, and among them was Owen's child. And, as Owen was thinking of this, Shunin smirked wide and clear and told Owen how lucky he really was. He was about to offer those children as sacrifice, but the new sacrifices have found their way here instead. So he is very lucky indeed, to which Owen just looked down and nodded. And knowing that this was an open threat, Owen showed to them how eager he was and promised to them that he will definitely deceive the other lizards in any way possible. And Owen clenched his teeth while saying so. If he had known, he wouldn't have worked so hard to come all the way here. Truth be told, they hadn't started out here. They hadn't come from the wilderness either, but they had been looking for a home as they had been attacked by several forces in the south. It was then Aloy's frogmen took the exhausted lizardmen in and warmly welcomed them. Outside of their different skin color, they welcomed them even though they were of another species. But of course, it was all trickery. The frogmen invested time to grant them favors and kindly accepted the grayish-brown lizardmen into their tribe. The lizardmen began to live a somewhat pleasant life alongside and under the influence of the frogmen. Then came the day the two tribes decided to hold a brotherly ritual, and everything changed. The grayish-brown lizardmen went kayaking with the frogmen warriors to enjoy a banquet held in the middle of the island. The lizardmen suspected nothing and had gotten completely drunk on the alcohol Aloy gave them. But the moment they passed out, they were all captured by the frogmen warriors, and the frogmen tribe currently had 1,500 frogmen, and 200 grayish-brown lizardmen were enslaved by them. Aside from the difference in numbers, the lizardmen children and their caregivers were all held hostage on the island, so the other lizardmen never tried to make a stand against the frogmen. And the most problematic thing was that the frogmen had a god, and that god demanded living sacrifices. The god didn't want the sacrifice to be animals, but instead wanted people, more specifically, beings that had a conscience and walked on two legs. And so, the tribal chief and warriors of the lizardmen were offered. The other grayish-brown lizardmen could clearly see what was happening on the island from across the lake. The monster chewed on and ate the tribal chief and warriors one by one, spitting out parts that tasted bad. Even as the lizardmen bore witness to the horrifying sight of their fellow men getting eaten alive, they couldn't do anything out of fear. Owen had also been among the lizardmen watching, and Owen was shrewd just like Shunin had said. He knew what kind of attitude he had to have in order to survive and protect his family. Owen knew that it would be more advantageous to approach the son Shunin instead of the old and large Aloy. Owen wasn't a warrior, but he would have been regarded as the wise one among his tribe, and he learned to be obedient at the present time. But still, reality hadn't changed. The two-headed fiend liked soft flesh. If old lizardmen were sacrificed, it would only kill them, and then it would demand the next sacrifice to be offered right away. Sometimes, it would even secretly go after and swallow frogmen, saying that the lizardmen's flesh was too thick, and on those days, the frogmen would hit the lizardmen and hurriedly sacrifice the children. So the reality is the two-headed fiend rules over the frogmen, and the frogmen rule over them. This won't change, and in Owen's opinion, things couldn't be changed if they weren't meant to be changed. The number of grayish-brown lizardmen had been rapidly decreasing ever since they were subjugated by the frogmen. They were either sacrificed or beaten to death, and if some managed to run away, the same number of lizardmen would then be sacrificed. It was inevitable that Owen's child would be claimed someday, but the opportunity has come. It was worth enduring everything until now. Even though the size of the new lizardman tribe was still unknown, their population didn't seem small. Though he doesn't think they have enough to fight against the frogmen. According to the frogmen warriors, there were about 600 lizardmen. Owen had considered inciting a fight between the frogmen and the lizardmen, but he thought the 600 lizardmen would just be outnumbered, and it would be impossible for them to defeat the two-headed fiend. The black-scaled lizardmen wouldn't stand a chance should a battle break out. They were a barbaric tribe from a distant land and didn't even know what a bow and arrow was. In addition to that, the frogmen had a secret weapon. Even if their grayish-brown scaled lizardmen tribal chief and warriors had fought the frogmen, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Everything is already set in stone. So the only possibility that Owen could really hold on to was to let the black-scaled lizard to be sacrificed first, as they can live a lot longer time if that happens. He doesn't care about others or even his own survivability. All he wanted was that his son lives a little longer, and a few days had passed on the side of Rekrek's tribe. It had been several days since their first encounter with the frogmen. Since then, Rakrik's clan and the frogmen had met 3 more times, and Rakrik's clan was able to exchange quite a few items that they liked. And when the 4th meeting arrived, Rakrik's clan had offered the frogmen a buffalo, which made Shunin happy to see a magnificent beast, and it's alive at that. And seeing Shunin's reaction, Rakrak again stated to him that this should be enough for the bow. But Shunin was hesitant about this. He knew they couldn't afford to give their weapons to the other tribe with just a few buffalo. But even before Shunin could respond, just like what Shunin had done, Owen stepped up to broke the tension off and suggested that before they could trade weapons, why don't they first get to know each other first? Plus, they do not know anything about the Black Scale tribe yet, so they would like to visit their village. Then they might be able to gift them a bow. And the bow was in fact a secondary issue to Rakrak. While it would definitely become a useful tool if they learned how to use it, the large frogman tribe was the main problem. Even though the 2 tribes had gotten quite close, the frogmen had never shown them their village. Their reason was that Rakrik's clan hadn't welcomed the frogmen into their village either. However, in Rakrak's opinion, he thought that because the frogman tribe was larger, they should be the ones to show their village first. With this in mind, he refused the offer that Shunin had gave. But the trade today wasn't for nothing, because as they were exchanging items, the lizardmen that were smart and had good vision would sneak a look at the bows and pretend to borrow and use it to take a closer look. But this approach had its limits. And so even with this, the arrow that they shot with their replica of a bow just flies about half as far as they shoot. It was not even close. This was the limit for imitated objects. Even though they tried to imitate it perfectly, they can't seem to figure out what exact material was used to make the bowstring. It seemed like the tendons of a creature were torn and weaved back together when they saw it last time. And the 5th meeting was underway, but they weren't thinking of bringing with them any buffaloes this time. So there's no mistake that they're trying to play a dirty trick. The problem is they don't know how they're going to play it. But even though exchanges with the frogmen were underway, Rakrik always made sure to stay alert. It wasn't easy for the frogmen to scout around Rakrik's clan, and he knows too well that they must make some progress today. So he asked Jol if she checked if their people have collected a lot of the medicine that apparently treats itchiness well, to which she confirmed. And it was apparently easy, as the herbalist knew of a place where the medicinal herb abundantly grew. This was such a good news for Rakrak, as he heard the frogman tribe was currently suffering from an itching illness, but fortunately, no one in Rakrik's clan had contracted it. This might also be by the grace of the nameless Beal god. But even with this, Rakrak was wishing that guy named Owen to be their key, which Jol overheard, so she suggested to give that Owen guy a chance. This made Rakrak think for a while, but a suggestion coming from his wife was a big deal, so he considered it. Meanwhile, back on the frogman's village, Owen was being choked by O'Boy as his plans didn't work out this time either. But seeing that Owen's face is already turning blue, Shunin told to stop, otherwise he might actually die. But O'Boy just continued as he was still dissatisfied with Owen, and seeing that he won't stop anytime soon. Owen gathered every oxygen that he could get to clarify things to them. He didn't mean to fail again, but these lizardmen with black scales and water buffalo skulls on their heads seem especially vigilant. In response, O'Boy insultingly asks Owen if he is saying these new lizards are different from they were, who were completely ignorant and just accepted everything, which Owen tried his best to reply with a smile and just agreed with him. But with the cowardly attitude that Owen displayed, O'Boy felt disgusted with him. He didn't even want Owen to be at close proximity with him any longer. And so he throw Owen to the ground and just leave Owen to Shunin. After O'Boy was nowhere to be seen, Shunin told Owen that it would be better for him to hurry, obtain as much information from them as he can, and if possible, he must try his best to invite him and his warriors to their village without raising any suspicions. This was a surprise to Owen, and the way Shunin had said it seemed to imply that something was wrong going on behind the scene. So he immediately asks Shunin what it was, but it seems that Shunin was hesitating whether to tell Owen or not. Still, Owen could only wait for Shunin's reply in the most subservient manner. Luckily, O'Boy wasn't here to stop Shunin from telling him, and Shunin decided that it would be okay for him to know. With this, Shunin revealed that his father, the tribal chief, wishes to hurry and carry out the living sacrifice. This was indeed a shocking news to Owen, since there was still quite some time until the sacrifice should be held. This was because they had hurriedly done so not long ago, and the ritual was held to get revelations from the two-headed fiend about Rakrik's clan, but nothing much came out of it compared to the value of the sacrifices. So we can't understand why they want to hold another ritual. So Owen just patiently waited for Shunin to reveal more. And probably, this information only shared among frogmen, so he must listen carefully. And just as he wanted, Shunin revealed to him that the disease is getting worse for the elders, his father included. This only confused Owen, as the only disease think of was the itching illness, which he believes it wasn't particularly life-threatening. But to his surprise, Shunin revealed to him that it was indeed a much dangerous disease. A priest died of this itching illness yesterday. They didn't tell them lizardmen, but once they get the itching illness, a sticky white layer of mucus begins to cover their skin, and that area becomes itchy. No matter how hard one tries to wipe it away, the mucus doesn't disappear, but continuously expands. It becomes hard to breathe once an infected was covered with the mucus for a certain period of time, and eventually they die. Owen listened with no facial expressions, and because of how smart he was, he knew that Shunin is testing him. This is the first time he is hearing that this itching illness is a deadly disease, but this also explains why some of the frogmen haven't been showing themselves lately. Everything makes sense now. Some of them are probably already dead, and he knows all too well that he couldn't appear glad or surprised, and therefore, Owen put on a sad expression, and stated that he should also be careful so word of this doesn't spread, because some healthy and energetic lizardmen may make fun of the frogmen, to which Shunin just casually responded, "That's obvious." But he admitted that they won't be able to hide the fact forever. And seeing that this was Shunin's main concern, Owen quickly thought of something, and so he stated that even if word spreads, there is a way to keep the lizardmen in check. They can tell them that it could also spread to lizardmen, which Shunin thought was a good idea. But the problem was it wouldn't really spread to them. To his surprise, Owen already has a solution for that. He revealed that there are grasses that create white foam if one mashed them, and also grasses that make one itch, and he is the one making the most contact with the frogmen, so all he has to do is pretend that he got it from them. This was such a sound plan, even Shunin couldn't help himself but get excited, and as Shunin was about to compliment Owen, he somehow couldn't think of an appropriate word to use and ended up mumbling. Then he thought of a good word to refer to Owen as a charlatan, which wasn't even a great compliment to say the least, but what could he do? And so he just laughs it off. But as Owen thought he had overcome a hurdle, Shunin went closer to him and whispered that his father's itching illness is becoming worse. He is a strong man, so he is holding against the disease longer than anyone else, but he is slowly losing energy. He wishes to be treated by offering a sacrifice to the two-headed fiend. Different from last time, they need a large-scale living sacrifice. They will need quite a lot this time. He is not quite sure how much, but they might sacrifice as much as possible until it works. And his father was a bit sad that there were quite a bit of children in the huts in the middle of the island, and that they weren't being used as sacrifices. And it seemed that Shunin didn't think too much about the lives of the lizardmen that were going to be abandoned anyway. However, Owen got shivers down his spine. He can't get the fact that these frogmen was planning to sacrifice them until it works. So be cursed at that damn two-headed fiend, as it was incompetent at doing anything. It's just a giant man-eating, commotion-making, and threatening monster. Just like how they are slaves to this freaking frogs, they are slaves to that monster. If it could cure the disease, it wouldn't have let them get it in the first place. However, Owen did not express these thoughts, and just stayed silent. But surprisingly, as his blood boils inside, Shunin promised that if he just lured out the black-scale lizardmen, he will unconditionally exclude his children from being sacrificed. And just with these few words, Owen's rage instantly dissipated. He even thanked Shunin for this, and promised that he will do his best. However, before Shunin could leave, Owen requested to at least reconsider trading a few bows for the negotiations. This irritated Shunin, but before he could respond, Owen explained that he saw the lizardmen's tribe leader get anxious like a child every time they showed him the bows, so he thinks it is the right time for them to give them what they want in order to get what they need. With this, Shunin was convinced, and now he believed that one bow isn't too great of a sacrifice if that means they can enslave them all, and the bow would eventually return to their possession anyway. The next day, the fifth meeting had started, and the lizardmen warriors and frogmen warriors were getting familiar with each other's faces, so the fifth meeting wasn't going too bad. Those who brought new goods to barter began to talk to each other and bargain. However, Owen the trickster knew there was not much information to get out of those lizardmen. He doesn't know how Rekrak the chief is keeping them quiet, but they don't say anything other than talking about trading goods. This guy named Rekrak is totally different. Even the exchange with Rekrak was much better than Owen had expected. So Owen wondered how Rekrak had been holding it in until now. But the tribal chief now pleaded for at least one bow in exchange for the abundant medicinal herbs they had collected. But Schumann didn't approve of it so easily. Even if he had approved to trade some bows yesterday, he was trying to get more out of Rekrak. And Sogi explained that he couldn't do just that for the time being, as they need a certain level of faith before trading weapons. But Rekrak already anticipated this, and so instead of just letting these frogmen walk all over them, he used this opportunity to get what he wanted. Basically, Rekrak suggested for the sake of the faith of both tribes, he has a request to make, and that is he would like a separate conversation with Owen, which Shunin approved while Oboy opposed the suggestion. But Oboy eventually caved given the attitude Rekrak had displayed. And just as Rekrak and Owen finally got to be alone, Rekrak asks Owen what he wanted. But Owen didn't recognize the change in Rekrak's attitude right away. All Owen thought was that the time had come to say what he had prepared. So he stated that he wanted trust, and just as Rekrak began to wonder what he meant, Owen began to lie. He stated that before them grayish-brown scaled lizardmen combined tribes with the frogmen, they held a brotherly ritual. Before that ritual was performed, they hung out and shared good things with each other, and also spent time getting to know each other. So he would like it if he tells them more about their tribe, and he too will provide him with as much information about the frogmen as possible. And Rekrak seemed to ponder for a moment on what to say. But he then noticed something on top of Owen's head and quietly laughed. Owen turned around to see what was going on and saw a blue butterfly flapping its wings behind him, which made him wonder why there was a butterfly in this time of year. It isn't too warm yet, and there haven't been this kind of butterflies around here in the first place, so that's a bit strange. But after seeing the blue butterfly, Rekrak knew exactly what to do, and so he puts all of his trust on his god's decision and confidently tell Owen everything about him and his tribe. Thank you, friends, for joining us on this exciting adventure in the world of Manhwa in today's Manhwa Maze. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on every exciting episode.